Our second guest is, she's come the furthest distance, I must say that. She's come from New York, Deanna Alarcon. Deanna Alarcon. Deanna is Senior Economic Affairs Officer at the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs. And for the last 2 years, she's served as Cluster Leader for Inclusive Development at the United Nations Development Programme. Deanna has extensive experience as a development economist. A previous UN assignment saw Deanna contribute to shaping the work agenda for the Millennium Development Goals. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of California, and the emphasis of her publications has been on employment, poverty and inequality, mainly in the context of Latin America. Please welcome Deanna Alarcon. If I can just ask Deanna to make some opening remarks on the basis of the summit itself in September and your assessment of whether it made any difference, what the successes are, and will we deliver on the goals?
Those are very large questions, but in 2 minutes I will try to make a couple of points in terms of what were the most important outcomes of the summit. We already heard from Minister Kevin Rudd how the summit was a very important occasion to take stock of where we are in terms of the Millennium Development Goals, what progress has been made, and what are the goals where additional progress and resources have to be invested in if we want to meet commitments for the year 2015. Something that was very important in the summit is the fact that all countries that originally participated in the year 2000, they confirm their commitment to the Millennium Development Goals, both in developing and developed countries. The MDGs, as we call them for short, are now part of the development agenda of developing countries. They are part of their sectoral plans, and they are systematically reporting on progress towards each one of those nationally owned development goals. And this is probably the most important contribution of the MDG agenda, the fact that we in the world have come together and have agreed on a set of priorities, these 8 priorities that the minister presented, in a global partnership for development. The last point I will make now is the fact that countries not only confirm their commitment to the Millennium Development Goals, but they also pledged resources, new resources, to accelerate progress, mainly in the areas of maternal and child mortality. There were as much as $40 billion committed to this objective, and it's going to be important to see how this rolls out. Make sure that resources are additional to the resources that have been committed before, and that they are effective in reducing maternal mortality and improving the health of children.
Okay, thank you, Deanna. That goes to some of the points I think that Kevin made about the review of the Australian program, and of course that issue of rolling out that's the big one, isn't it? You can make a pledge, does it turn up? Let me introduce Jo Chandler to you. Jo is a Walkley Award-winning senior writer for the Melbourne Age, whose brief is to write in-depth news and analytical coverage on big issues of the moment. She has particular interests in human rights and development, in climate change, Indigenous issues, social affairs and medical and science news. I could list all the awards that Jo has won, but it might take a little while. Needless to say, she's a very highly regarded journalist who has travelled very, very widely across sub-Saharan Africa, Papua New Guinea, Antarctica, Afghanistan. Very, very diverse indeed. Jo, one of her awards was the 2010 United Nations Association of Australian Media Peace Award for Best Print Feature, which was on Afghanistan and Australia's aid there. So if I can get you to welcome Jo, and she'll speak to us for a couple of moments as well. I think the most interesting point that from your perspective would be how you see aid on the ground in terms of effectiveness and the contrasts that you've probably seen in your travels, and perhaps from a media perspective some of the criticism that you might apply to the way aid is approached.
It can be very difficult when you go into the field and you're trying to look at the effectiveness of programs, because the fact is, in a lot of the most inaccessible and destabilised and needy areas, you are very much having to travel within sort of the crisis caravan, for want of another way of putting it, that you're travelling with aid organisations, NGOs. You're relying on them these days increasingly for security, for assistance with logistics, for interpreting services along the way. Once upon a time, newspapers had much handsomer resources and would be able to be a bit more independent. That's becoming increasingly difficult. So the onus then becomes very, it's a very difficult ask of the journalist involved to be able to move within that context, stay within that sort of, I guess, safety umbrella that's been constructed, but maintain some separation and distance and critical faculty when seeing what's in front of you. And it's hard too often, because you're dealing with extraordinary people who, it's very easy to fall into the thrall of people that do the kind of work that's occurring on the front line, and you can't help generally but admire them. So you have to work quite hard to be putting on your critical head, wondering, what am I being told here? Does it really gel with what I'm seeing? What am I not seeing? And also asking questions about, okay, I've been presented to this village or to this forum, and then pushing a bit to try to get a bit further in to talk to people that are not necessarily rounded up and presented to you as the best talent. But there's a lot of questions for journalists going into those environments, and I'll admit that even after 5 years of going to different places, every trip is an education, and every time I come back I'm thinking again about how might I have done that better, did I get it right, how do I improve my, you know, even who do I talk to within the village? Is it appropriate to go to the neediest, the most afflicted people? Does that tell the real story, or is that in itself a distortion? Which I don't know if people are familiar, I guess a lot of people here would be familiar with Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times, who I've admired for many years, but he did a recent documentary on Congo, and to see the way he operates and raised a lot of questions for me about the journalist's role within these environments. And he unapologetically says, he goes there and takes that line that, you know, who here has been raped and speaks English? You know, goes and finds the most extreme cases, the sickest people, the most brutalised. But is that really the way to tell the story? And often too, he's also telling the story through the eyes of the Great White Hope, the people that have arrived to fix the problem, and ignoring locals. But he unapologetically says that's what he needs to do to capture audiences and editors' interests. So these are the issues that we wrestle with when we come in and try and evaluate the programs we see.
Okay, thanks, Jo. I think there are some interesting questions around the whole issue of media presentation of aid issues there that Jo has raised, and how we appropriately address issues of development in the media.